Hi there, and welcome to the Growth Execution Podcast. We are here every week to bring you actionable tips on how to launch, relaunch, grow, scale your businesses. Delighted to be joined this week by Devin Miller of Miller IP Law. Devin, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful as ever. No complaints.
Excellent. That is fantastic to hear. So look, we are always interested in business people and how they've got to where they are right now. So I'm going to start with your launch story. Devin, how did you set up your business and what brought you here?
Yeah, and I'll focus that on the IP law firm. I've actually done a few other startups and small businesses that I've actively still participate in several of them. That's a little bit longer story. Happy to get into it if you want.
Yeah, we'll dig into those, I'm sure.
But on the IP or on the law firm side, Miller IP Law. So I started that about 3 years ago. Really, it started. So before that, I'd worked with some of the top 100 law firms, some of the biggest, law firms in the nation or in the U.S., as well as with some of the, top 100 companies, Fortune 100 companies, and kind of within that, it was fun in the sense that, if you say, hey, I did work for Amazon and Intel and Red Hat, people would always recognize the name or Ford or that. And yet on the other hand, it was one where when I looked at the people I liked working with and the clients I liked working with, it always kind of circled back to I loved working with the startups and the small businesses. You got to get in more on the ground level. You got to have more of an impact. You got to strategize with them more. And they're just kind of a more fun client as opposed to when I worked on the big companies, it was you're working on a small increment or incremental change to something that a product or a patent that was already out there. Where this one was like, it's a one shot for the moon type of a thing with the startup or small business. So with that, I kind of decided, hey, I want to adjust or change my career a bit or the focus of it. And so I decided to start my own law firm with the focus of doing startups and small businesses. Did that about 3 years ago and then been doing it ever since.
Fantastic. And what kind of drove you to kind of think that the small business, I mean, you mentioned obviously that being part of a large organization, you don't really have the impact. Do you find that what you're able to do is different? And what kinds of stories do you come across? What sort of businesses are you working with?
Yeah, really pretty well across the board. I've done intellectual property from everything from a boat anchor to wearables to medical devices to autonomous cars to drones to, pretty well across the board. And we do trademarks from everything from ice cream companies to, our pharmaceuticals and skincare. So it's pretty diverse, which I enjoy. I think it's really fun to see all those different things. But, kind of when we looked up and kind of what we did different, it's a lot of one thing is kind of within the intellectual property community, startups and small businesses are usually kind of the overlooked or neglected part of the business in the sense that most firms are going to say, hey, we want the big businesses. They have a lot of billables, a lot of hours. And so they focus on doing that. And if the startup comes along, we'll do it for them, but it's going to be expensive for them. They're not going to get the same level of service. So kind of try to take that a bit on its head and say, why can't I set up a firm that one is a bit more cost competitive so that it helps startups and small businesses that can afford the big firm rates, but it still provides the same level of quality and service. So that's kind of been a bit of our mantra, is to provide the same level of quality and service at a more competitive price so startups and small businesses compete with the big firms.
Brilliant. And what kind of what's the sort of the crazy stuff that you must come across? I mean, some people must try and sort IP out for some really interesting ideas more than anything else, I'm guessing.
Yeah, usually if you get to the idea stage, usually the biggest red flag or one of the red flags is when somebody comes along and they say, I've got this great idea. It's going to change the world and it's going to have the biggest impact. And you say, well, okay. Usually if they say the word idea as opposed to invention or product or prototype, you're thinking, okay, it's probably they've had an idea they had yesterday. They haven't looked into it at all. And so they haven't done anything. So usually say, well, that's great. You have a good idea. Now, here's your next steps. Go figure out how it's going to work, how you're actually going to build it, and then we'll get involved. I mean, we've had people that have come that want to do almost a perpetual motion machine. They'll say it's different, but it was basically making a car run off of its own energy or using the exhaust of a car in order to power itself. And I'm like, if you can figure it out and make it work, that would be great. But until you actually get it to work, probably don't want to spend your money on patent. Let's get it working first. And then if you really make a perpetual motion machine, that'll be awesome. That'll be definitely something we'd like to work on. You'll get a lot of people that are just kind of, I said, idea guys, that they always have a new idea. And then usually you get to, well, here's how much our fees are, here's how much it costs. I'm like, Well, I can't really afford it right now, but would you take it on contingency or take a portion of the proceeds? I'm saying, well, probably not, because ideas are a dime a dozen, is always in the execution. So there's a lot of different fun things, and a lot of them are fun to walk through the door and lots of fun things to work on.
You must come across some really interesting people along the way as well, right?
You get all types. Yep.
Yeah.
Everything from an astute business person all the way to the perpetual idea guy that never executes, but always has the next idea that will change the world.
Love that. And look, I mean, we there at Growth, it's about growth execution. So we absolutely love the idea of getting things done rather than having the ideas. And I think that's so true. You know, anybody listening in who's got a great idea, the thing they've got to really work on is how to get that out into play, right? And then they can start to think about how they might be able to patent it or what the IP might be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's ideas is backwards as a mindset. Ideas are the easy thing. I mean, everybody has their idea that will change the world, or it's a great product. I know a lot of them are good, really good ideas, but there are a lot of people out there that have had ideas that they never follow through on, they never execute on, they never do anything with. And then they always say, well, I have this great idea that I had 10 years ago that I still think, or I had that idea and then somebody else went execute, now it's out there. And if only. And it's like, yes, but they actually did something. They built it. Like, having the idea, there's probably another 100 people that also had that idea. One person actually did something with it, and they're the ones that are now profiting from it.
Yeah, it's so true. If we had that dime or a penny for every time you've heard people say, I had that idea 10 years ago. I could have been Amazon. So yeah, you kind of could, but I guess Jeff just kind of got ahead, just kind of had some better execution on that. You were talking as well about kind of other businesses along the way. One of the things that we're really focused on here as well is about how people kind of develop into the current business that they're in. What's your kind of historic story, and how did you move from that sort of corporate world through?
Yeah, and I'll that takes a bit back in time, so I'll try and keep it a reasonably short answer, because I could go on for a very long time. That's a fun discussion. But so undergraduate, I ended up getting 4 degrees, which my wife is always going to say is 3 degrees too many, but I enjoyed it. But undergraduate, I got an electrical engineering degree and a degree in Mandarin Chinese. And I got towards and really my focus is on engineering, Mandarin Chinese. I actually did a religious mission for my church. And so I served in Taiwan. And so I'd actually picked up the Chinese language. So I got back to school. So I'll just add that on as a second degree, but it wasn't necessarily the focus of my career. So I got to the end of electrical engineering and I kind of said, well, I like engineering, but I don't want to be an engineer, in the sense that I don't want to work on a project for a long period of time. Usually with an engineer, you have to work 20 years plus up into a company before you really have any impact or say and everything, and said that doesn't really sound enticing to me. And so I kind of had 2 passions that I was looking at. One was I loved loved startups, kind of the whole idea of doing a business, and then I also found law and intellectual property and that type of aspect to be pretty interesting as well. And so I was kind of going back and forth as to what I wanted to do or what I wanted to do, and I kind of came to the conclusion I didn't want to decide, so I was going to do both. So I went off and I got a law degree and an MBA degree at the same time. So I got the law degree to do the legal and intellectual property, and MBA or Master's of Business Administration to cover more of the entrepreneur side. So I kind of continued to, and that's really been kind of a theme throughout my whole career. I've always been kind of chasing those 2 different, avenues and trying to always mesh them. And I feel like I've finally got them to mesh together. But so along that, really my first dip into entrepreneurship and startups is there was a business competition, and I was, just give you a perspective. At the time I was doing my law degree, I was doing my MBA degree. I had a 2-year-old. I had 1 baby that was just a newborn. I was working 20 hours as a law clerk. And then on top of all that, I saw, I can't remember if it was a flyer or an email, but it came in, I saw basically a business competition. It was one where everybody can get together. Nobody really knows anybody. You form your groups, it's in multidisciplinary. So you have engineers and attorneys and designers, and you all get together. So I got together with a group of people I never knew before. We entered it in the first year. never went anywhere. We took second place, but it was an idea that nobody was really jazzed about. But we got together the next year and we were kind of thinking about, hey, what could we do this year for the business competition and what could we enter? And we had some crazy ideas, self-packing boxes, and I think a few other ones, but we couldn't really ever figure out one that we thought would work in reality. And so I remember walking home from that after one of our brainstorming meetings, and I got into marathon running and I still love to run, but I was looking and saying, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you can monitor your hydration level as you're running so you can make sure to stay hydrated and so you don't become dehydrated. And so this was in the days before Fitbit and they didn't have Apple Watch or any of those out yet. So I thought that would be a really cool idea. So that was a genesis. Entered the business competition, got started. We took second place again, which was still a bittersweet thing and another log story. But that was kind of the first startup. And that one is still active today. And I still have a role in it. We've actually merged with another company, but it's still going. It's now an 8 going on a 9-figure business. And as well as, so I kind of had that entrepreneur bent, and I've since then done a few other businesses, some of which I'm still actively involved with. And then I had the law side. So I've always kind of had these two things. And about 3 years ago, I'd always have my law job, which was pay the bills, kind of was a lawyer, and I enjoyed it. And then I'd have my second really full-time job, which was all the side businesses and the startups. And so about 3 years ago, I said, as I'm doing my own law firm, how can I kind of mesh these all together? So it's not kind of two different competing interests, but really one together. And so that's where I kind of, as I started my law firm, I also started the other businesses, kind of formed them all as one, and they actually have some pretty good synergy. So that's kind of a longer answer to a short question, but that's kind of how I weaved in a lot of my career and kind of how things have got to where they're at today.
That's brilliant. But I mean, obviously there's a number of different strands, but you're still following, you're following your why, right? You're following what you want to do and bringing those two things together. And I think that's super impressive. For those who aren't watching this on YouTube, and this will go up after the podcast, your logo's up there and it's got Miller IP Law and little card in there as innovation. So it absolutely smashes those two things together, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I love startups, love small businesses. So across the law firm, I focus on startups and small businesses. I do my own startups and small businesses. And just kind of, that's my mantra, is either building or helping to grow and build either my own startups and small businesses as well as other people's.
Fantastic. What do fresh entrepreneurs not know about the law that they should?
A lot of everything. What do entrepreneurs not know? I mean, I think that there is a long list. The problem is if you knew everything before you got started as an entrepreneur, you would never get started. If you knew all of the failures you succeed, all the pivots, all the sleepless nights, all the stress that you'd have to wear multiple hats, you'd have to do hiring and firing and product development and sales and marketing and being the janitor and being the last or first one in and the last one out and never taking a break and always having, I could go on and on. If you give a list to somebody of all of those things that they should know that they're going to get themselves into, they'd be like, I might just not do this. But yeah,
that job that I was working at sounds fine, actually.
So I love it and enjoy it, but I think there's a lot of people, and that's why I think a lot of people get into entrepreneurship and they don't make it very long, the last 6 months, a year, and then they kind of die out because it is a lot of work, a lot of stress, a lot of effort, but it's a lot of fun. So I think that going in with a bit of eyes wide open, the analogy I stole it from someone else, so I can't take credit for it, but the one that I love is I used to say, kind of entrepreneurship is like a roller coaster. You have your ups and downs, and then somebody else is like, well, it's not really roller coaster. It's really more the whole theme park. You get in the parking lot, you park, and it's so exciting. You're going to go and have a great time. And then you go on and you go on a few roller coasters and you get sick. And then you have to, you throw up, you have to take a break for a while. And then you get feeling a little better. And then you go jump on the bumper cars and get banged around a bit. And then you get off those and you go get a corn dog and it tastes good. And it's kind of that whole theme park. And I think that's an apt analogy of really it's the whole theme park that is where you're going through.
Love that. That's such a good analogy. And from the kind of legal perspective, are there things that you come across like all the time that people just don't do?
Probably focusing on intellectual property and kind of the legal perspective, the biggest thing the biggest catch up is when people don't realize that there are certain deadlines that they're going to hit up against, that if they miss, it creates a much bigger problem. Sometimes you can't recover from, but even if you can, it's a lot more expensive. So give you a couple examples. So as an example with patents, if you're in patents or if you have an invention, a product, something you want to protect, you go with the patent. Well, with patents, there's a statutory law and a rule that if you put something out in the public for more than a year, you're not able to get a patent on it anymore. You basically dedicated it to the public domain where anybody can go after it, and you're not able to get a protection for it. So the problem is always is a lot of times when people come in, they'll say, okay, I've been working on this business. We've been out in the marketplace for a couple of years. We're really excited. We finally have the money to go after a patent. We'd like to pursue after it. And usually the conversation goes something like, well, that is great that you got a great business. I'm excited for you. It sounds like a great product. Unfortunately, I'm not able to help you because you missed a deadline. And so a lot of times people are fearful that they're going into attorney. It's going to be a lot of time and expense. They can't afford it. And so they kind of put it off. And then they get into those things. And same thing with the brand, and I've had even conversation this last couple of weeks where somebody comes in and says, well, I'm building a brand and we've been doing it for 4 or 5 years and we'd like to get a trademark on it. And then they come and say, let's do a search on it, see what else is out there, what other people are doing, and say, well, just so you're aware, somebody else has the same brand. They've been using it for 10 years. And now you either get to go rebrand, which is going to be a lot of time and money and expense, or you got to go get a license from them. And all the options are bad and they're all expensive. Yeah. And so I think if I could give one advice, it would be at least get a strategy. Even if you can't afford it, I'll say sit down. I do it, and I know a lot of other attorneys. Well, you can have a free consultation or a free strategy meeting, and you sit down with them and actually just go through. Here's what we're doing. Find out what your deadlines are. Find out when you should be considering things, such that you can at least build that into your strategies so you don't miss those deadlines.
I think that's such good advice, and we spend a lot of time on marketing brand. And one of the things that I'm really kind of focused on is whatever it's called, it almost doesn't matter. It does matter a bit, but it really doesn't matter. So if you get obsessed with this one name and this one word, and you find out somebody else has got it, and it's causing you big problems, all that sort of stuff, it doesn't matter as much out there as you think it does. As long as you've got the brand attributes, as long as you've got the passion, you've got the kind of service, the product, whatever it is, you can almost call it what you like. And then you can go and patent it and all that sort of stuff. So searching around for domain names, URLs that are vacant, things like that is a really good use of time up front, rather than kind of going after it later and discovering, as you say, that somebody else has been using it forever.
Yeah, and that's even with the URLs is a whole nother thing. And first of all, this is a quick reminder, audience: a URL and a business registration are not a trademark. So just because you have the URL doesn't mean you actually have the rights to use that name. But the problem is like with the URL is, people think, well, I've got you a business name. Then they get mad when they'll go out and somebody else is cyber squatting, or they're not using the URL, but it's taken. They're like, well, how can they do that? I'm like, well, they purchased it, they own it, and they can do it as they will. And just because you would want to use that URL doesn't mean that they have to sell it to you.
No, not for the price that you want. For the price they want.
With enough money, everybody will sell their URL, but it can a lot of times be a lot more expensive than you're willing to pay.
There is, that price could be very high indeed. And do you find that the way that people set up businesses can have some kind of challenges as well? And what's your kind of advice around that? Is it, as a solopreneur, obviously that's relatively straightforward, but when you've got partnerships where you're splitting businesses up between a number of different interests, how does that kind of shape up? I
mean, first of all, I would just tell people one of the very first steps I would recommend, even before patents, trademarks, or anything else, is to set up a business, whether that's an LLC, S Corp, C Corp, or whatever that might be. And the main reason being is a business is going to protect you as your personal asset. So that means that somebody can't necessarily, it makes it much more difficult for somebody to come after your house or your mortgage or your savings or your cars or life savings or anything else. And if you just operate as, hey, I'll just start this as a side business, doing it on my own, and you never bother to set that up, you're leaving a lot of vulnerability and liability on your personal assets. Because then they come, if they have a problem, if you get sued, if you have a product liability, anything goes wrong with your business, they can come after you personally. So as far as kind of what the business is, I mean, usually if I was at least in the US, if I was a solo entrepreneur, a small person, I'd probably go for an LLC because they're less expensive, they're easier to maintain, they're easier to file or easier to file on. Usually when you're getting into an S Corp or C Corp, at least in the US, and I'm sure other places are similar, it's usually one is for tax purposes. If you have certain tax ones, and I don't get into taxes. I don't love taxes. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'd go talk with a CPA or tax attorney. But taxes is one. And the other one is if you're looking to set up your business for investors, for shareholders, for someone where you want to have, as opposed to equity ownership, you want to sell stock or share, then you're going to go that. So whatever it is, all of them are fine options, and really, as long as you get it in place, you're going to be you're 90% of the way there, and then it's the last 10% as to how to set it or which one makes sense for your situation. But I would definitely, one of the very first things is to get something set up so you're not putting your personal assets at risk.
That sounds such good advice, because I think LLC over here in the UK is a limited liability company or a limited company. So yeah, what that does, as it says on the tin, is it limits your liability, and it can be something as straightforward as giving advice to somebody and then taking that advice, or saying that they've taken your advice and something going terribly wrong, right?
Yep, exactly. Or you get a kid, let's say you come up with a kid's product, and it's a great kid's product, and one kid has one accident, product liability, you don't anticipate, you have 100,000 kids, only one gets hurt or has an issue. It's a very small percentage you never anticipate, and yet it can take down the whole company, and it can take down you personally and drive into bankruptcy. And so it's much easier to make sure that you have whatever it is, whatever reasons, is to make sure you have that protection in place.
Super solid advice, and thanks, Devin. Now I'm going to just ask a few more questions before we go, and very much around sort of your experience and stuff. If you were to go back 20 years and you were giving advice to yourself when you were setting up, what would your advice be? What would you advise yourself?
Yeah, and I've talked with literally hundreds of entrepreneurs, and I end up giving the exact same thing that almost every entrepreneur does. So it's not new to me or overly insightful, but it would be, if I were to go back 20 years, it'd be get started earlier. It's too often, and I fall into that same category, is you go down the idea of, I need to work for a big corporation, or I need to go get experience, or I need to have more savings, or whatever. And you can come up with a long list of excuses as to why you shouldn't get started right now and why it's not a good time, or I just had a kid, or I just got married, or I just graduated. I mean, I can list all the things I hear. And yet the biggest thing is, once you get started, everybody's saying, I wish I got started, and myself included, because once you do it and you love it, and it makes it life so much more enjoyable. You have more passion, more excitement. So if I were to go back, it'd be the simple advice of get started now as opposed to waiting.
I love that. And then when you were talking earlier on about all the kind of challenges and all that sort of stuff, actually that's not a reason not to do it, is it? It's a reason to do it, because that's the fun. And I couldn't agree more. I think that if you, the things you learn, so like, I did 10 years in corporate, and if I'd have done 2 years in corporate and then been that extra 8 years early on, then I would know so much more as well. So I think that's top solid advice. Do you have somebody that you think of, that you look on as kind of an inspiration?
Yeah, and maybe it sounds a bit cheesy or corny. I look at my dad as an inspiration. So he's worked with everything from big businesses, done his own business, started his engineering firm. I've actually had on several of my own projects. We worked together in businesses and that together. It's been a fun and a great experience. And so more than anything, if I have a question or an idea or something I want to bounce something off with, or an issue I'm facing, I'll go to him, because he has a lot of experience, and we have a very good level of trust. If I were to go outside of that, I don't know if I have any mentors that I have the one-on-one relationship like I do him, but I always look for, hey, there are a lot of smart people. I can read their books, listen to their podcasts, get their material, and I look to his mentorship, even though they have no idea who I am. And so I look at that as one that I look at as, Dave Ramsey. He's known for finance, and a lot of times it's for personal finance, but at least in the US and that. But a lot of what he has, he's built a very successful business, done a lot of things, and I look at a lot of what he does gives people for personal advice goes very well with business. So I always look to as another source of mentorship.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of we're almost in a really amazing time where you can just kind of listen to books, or you can just go onto YouTube, and you can see so many great people giving so much great advice. So I think it's a wonderful time to start a business. That's I keep coming back to that. It's almost no better time ever, I don't think.
And I'll give you just one interesting, and I know you didn't ask, but I'll answer your question. No, didn't ask. But one interesting statistic, at least in the U.S., is right now, it used to be that, hey, 90% or whatever it was, you'd hear all different numbers, for businesses fail within the first either year or 5 years. And it's interesting, right now it's actually flipped. So it's more likely a business is going to be successful for less than 10 years. It's going to grow and be successful. The businesses that are having a hard time continuing to succeed are the ones that are 10 years or older. So it's interesting. That used to be opposite. If you made it 10 years, you were golden. Your business was, you figured it out and you have a reputation, a brand. Yeah. Right now it's opposite. You're much better to start a business. You're going to have a success. It's much harder to keep a business after that period of time.
Love that. I'm going to try and do some stats over this side of over in the UK as well, just to see if it's similar. And I can't imagine it wouldn't be, but that makes kind of sense, right? Because those businesses that started up in the technological age are probably now way ahead of those. And you look around the retail, there's a lot of decimation going on, certainly over here. I'm sure it's the same over where you are. So no, thanks for that. Really, really cool stat. And where do you think things are going? We just talked about the fact that more younger businesses are going to be the kind of successes of the future. What do you see as being sort of one of the big trends coming down the track? What do you think's happening?
Yeah, and I think that, and it's one of the trend that I'm trying to set up or my companies with, because I think, if I think it's a trend and it's worth coming, I'm going to try and anticipate it. But, one of the ones I think is automation. Now, automation gets a bad name, and I think to some degree, rightly so, because most of the time when you say automation, people think of, hey, I'm going to call up customer service. They're going to go make me through this, push 20 different buttons. I'm going to finally get directed to somebody after 20 minutes. They're going to tell me I got the wrong one, and I'm either going to have to start all over, or they're going to transfer me 3 more times. And that's absolutely not what I think automation is. But I think that where it's going to start coming up is we're going to find ways to automate the tasks that are repetitive, that we don't need the human touch, such that it allows us to have a greater amount of human touch at different points. In other words, you're going to free up your time for areas that you do need the person and individual to put time on task, to have that custom that individual touch, to have that one-on-one relationship. You're going to figure out ways to free up your time so that you can focus on that more. So I think that a lot of businesses, as they're now growing and expanding, are saying, okay, we don't want to remove the human touch. Rather, it's more important now than ever to have that human touch, but we don't have unlimited time. So how can we free up time in other areas?
So the bits that can be automated will be automated and will be, almost kind of going on the background, but the kind of the interfaces, the human kind of side of things is going to be much more real. And I completely agree. I think that, more now, those that have the time to be able to devote to each other, I think is improving customer service, improving relationships, and helping people do better business. So no, I love it. Listen, Devin, it's been amazing. Thanks so much for your time. And look, we could carry on talking as I'm sure we will do. So look, it's been great. How can people get in touch with you if they're looking to find out more about Miller IP?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple ways. So in either US or, across the pond or anywhere else, if they want to reach out to me and grab some time on my schedule, I'm always happy to chat, kind of go through and answer ideas, strategize, and think through things. They can go to strategymeeting.com. That links right to my calendar, gives you an easy way to grab a few minutes, free of charge, won't charge anything. If you just want, so strategymeeting.com, if you want to connect with me generally or personally one-on-one. If you just want to find out more about the firm, kind of what we do, what our focus is, what our prices are, and everything else, then you can just go to lawwithmiller.com, all one word, lawwithmiller.com, and that's an easy way to find out more. And we have a ton of resources to learn a lot about everything we've discussed here.
Perfect. Brilliant. Listen, you've been so great and so generous with your time, with your advice. Thanks so much for that, Devin Miller. We will be back again next week with more actionable tips on the Growth Execution Podcast. Thanks everybody for listening in. Go away, have a great growth week, and we will see you again back here next week.